The hospital called to tell me my daughter had been rushed to the emergency room. I ran over there and found her barely conscious. Mom, he cheated on me with my sister-in-law, in my own house. When they saw me, he pushed me down the stairs. The motherly instinct in me woke up. Nobody has the right to hurt my daughter and live to tell the tale. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. On Thursday afternoon, the sky over the city was gray, and the rain was falling without stopping, as if it wanted to drown the whole city. I was in my small kitchen quickly stirring a pot of stew that was boiling hard. The smell of corn and pork filled the air, and I smiled thinking about the warm dinner that awaited us. Valerie, my daughter, had promised to stop by if Richard, her husband, didn't have to work late. I always long for those moments, when the two of us can sit and talk like before, when she was a little girl and would cling to me to tell her stories. The old radio on the kitchen shelf broadcast the news with its constant hum. The announcer mentioned an accident on Highway 57. I listened distractedly as I cut thin slices of lemon to put on a plate. Suddenly, the phone vibrated. An unknown number from St. Philip's Hospital appeared on the screen. My heart skipped a beat, but I told myself it must be a mistake. I answered, and a young woman's nervous voice came from the other side. "Mrs. Elizabeth Miller, your daughter Valerie Miller has just been brought to the emergency room. You should come immediately." I froze. The knife fell from my hand onto the table, the blade hitting the wood with a dry clack. "Emergency. What happened? What happened to my daughter?" I asked with a broken voice. From the other side, they just answered curtly. "She fell down the stairs at her house." Without thinking, I turned off the stove, leaving the pot of stew still boiling. I grabbed the old coat hanging behind the door. The car keys jingled in my trembling hand. My sandals were forgotten in some corner. I put on some old shoes and ran out. The rain was falling as if it wanted to erase the world. I crossed the patio and almost slipped on the soaked floor. The thunder rumbled, each clap hitting my chest. I called Mrs. Linda, the neighbor who lives next to Valerie's house. Her voice trembled on the other end. I just heard a terrible scream and then a very loud thud, as if something had fallen down the stairs. "I don't know what happened, Elizabeth." Her words chilled my blood. The drive to the hospital only takes 15 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The rain beat against the windshield, and although the wipers were moving at maximum speed, they couldn't clear the view. I drove like a sleepwalker, my hands gripping the steering wheel and muttering prayers. "Please, God, protect my daughter." When I arrived at St. Philip's Hospital, I was soaked, my hair stuck to my face and my coat dripping water. The old guard at the entrance recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Elizabeth, come in quickly," he said, rushing me down the emergency room hallway. The smell of alcohol and disinfectant was so strong it made me dizzy. A gurney passed in front of me, and I gasped when I saw Valerie there. Her long black hair was matted, stained with blood. Her face was pale, lifeless. "Valerie!" I shouted and ran after her, but a nurse stopped me. "You can't go in, they're taking her to the operating room." I stood in front of the door, my legs about to give out. Through the small glass, I could only see shadows in white coats moving hastily. A doctor's voice was heard firm and distant. "Intracranial hematoma fracture in the left forearm. Prepare for the CT scan." I hugged my chest, feeling my heart break. Valerie. My daughter, the little girl I held in my arms since she was born, was now between life and death. Dr. Evans came out. His face was serious, but his eyes were full of compassion. "Who are you to the patient?" he asked. "I'm her mother," I replied. My voice choked. He nodded and put a hand on my shoulder. "Your daughter was very lucky to survive. The fall from the top floor down the spiral staircase was extremely dangerous." I asked with a trembling voice. "Who brought my daughter here?" He answered. "A man who said he was her husband. He left right after signing the papers, Richard." His name crossed my mind like a blast of cold air. I begged to be allowed to see her, but they told me I had to wait until Valerie stabilized. I sat in a plastic chair in the hallway, my hands shaking, and the rainwater still dripping from my coat onto the floor. Around me, the hospital atmosphere was so heavy, I felt it crushing my shoulders. A woman was sobbing in a corner. A child with a bandaged arm was complaining softly. the smell of disinfectant mixed with the sounds of machines creating a cold, soulless atmosphere. The clock on the wall read just past 7 in the evening, but I felt that time had stood still. Finally, a young nurse called my name. "Mrs. Miller? Miss Valerie has woken up, but she is still very weak. You can go in to see her." I jumped up. My legs were shaking so much I almost stumbled. In the intensive care unit, Valerie was there motionless, surrounded by tubes and wires. The fluorescent light fell on her pale face, her dry lips, the bruises spreading across her neck. Seeing her like that, I felt my heart tear apart. It was my daughter, the girl I had taken care of, for whom I had spent sleepless nights when she was sick, whom I taught to draw her first strokes. And now she was there, fragile as a leaf about to fall. I took her cold hand and whispered, "Valerie, it's me, Mom." Her eyelids moved slightly before slowly opening. Her tired eyes shone when she saw me. "Mom." Her voice was hoarse, weak, as if it were going to fade into the air. I leaned in, thinking she wanted water, but she shook her head. Valerie squeezed my hand gently. Her cold fingers made me shiver. "Mom, he cheated on me," she murmured, her voice choked as if afraid someone would hear her. "Who, honey?" I asked, although I already had a feeling. Valerie's chapped lips tightened and a tear rolled down her cheek. "Richard. With Chloe, his sister-in-law, in my room." I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. Richard, the man I considered a son, in whom I trusted the most valuable thing I had. Chloe, his sister-in-law, the one I knew from family dinners, always smiling, always kind. What had they done to my daughter Valerie? Continued each word like a knife stabbing my chest. When they saw me, he pushed me. I fell down the stairs. Mem. The last thing I remember was his laughter before everything went black. My mind was spinning. Everything was becoming a blur. Push her laugh. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rage surged within me, but I held it back because Valerie's hand was still trembling in mine. A nurse came in gently telling me that I should let her rest. I nodded and got up, but before leaving, Valerie gathered her strength to say one last sentence, her voice weak, full of terror. "Mom. They said they'll tell the police I fell on my own." I turned to look at my daughter. Her eyes shone with pleading, with a deep fear. I put my hand on her forehead and whispered, "Mom, we'll get you justice." That promise came from the bottom of my heart like an oath before God. I went out into the hallway. The door closed behind me, and only the constant sound of the heart monitor remained. Beep, beep. That sound was like the beat of the anger growing inside me. I managed to see a nurse writing in the emergency log, "Domestic accident, fall down the stairs." That phrase made me want to scream. Accident. No, this was not an accident. Through the small glass of the door, Valerie's silhouette looked fragile alone among those cold machines. I clenched my fists. My nails dug into my palm until it hurt, but I didn't care. And then, at the end of the hallway, I saw him. Richard. He was wearing a black suit. He was talking calmly on the phone, a cup of coffee in his hand, as if nothing had happened. He was the one who brought my daughter here, and he left right after signing the papers. He, the same one Valerie had just told me had pushed her down the stairs. I stood there watching him through the fogged glass, feeling my blood boil. In my head there was only one thought, cold and sharp as a razor. Nobody hurts my daughter and gets to walk away so calmly. I let my mind go back to the days before everything fell apart. That spring, the city sky was full of bougainvillea flowers. I still clearly remember the night Valerie and Richard came home to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. I prepared a table full of traditional dishes, corn tamales, enchiladas, smothered in mole sauce, and a plate of stuffed peppers, Valerie's favorite since she was a child. I wanted that night to be warm, like when I held her in my arms in her childhood days. Richard came in with a bottle of expensive red wine in his hand, and that smile of his that I always found hard to decipher. "I wasn't going to come empty-handed, mother-in-law," he said with a voice as sweet as honey. I smiled, but inside I felt a slight unease. Richard always spoke in a way that made you want to believe him, but his eyes were cold, as if they were hiding something. Throughout the dinner, he didn't stop talking about the new branch the bank was about to open. He complained about business trips and meetings that lasted until dawn. "Work has me up to my neck, mother-in-law," he said, raising his wine glass while his gaze slid towards Valerie. My daughter just smiled weakly and said in a low voice, "Lately, he practically lives at the office, Mom." Valerie's smile was not like before. Her eyes, which used to sparkle when she talked about her paintings, were now covered by a shadow of sadness. I noticed that Richard was looking at his phone every now and then. Every time the screen lit up, he would turn it face down immediately, as if he was afraid someone would see something. I tried to push away that bad feeling, telling myself that maybe he was just stressed from work. That night, in the middle of dinner, Richard got up to take a call on the patio. He took a long time to come back. His tall silhouette looked blurry under the lamplight. When he returned, his shirt had some wrinkles, and I smelled a strange sweet perfume, but not Valerie's. I asked him jokingly, trying to sound calm. "A lot of work, son." He laughed and answered immediately. "Nothing, just a client mother-in-law. Just some ladies who want to know more about loans." His words were smooth, but that uncomfortable feeling didn't go away. Something wasn't right, although I couldn't say what. A week later, Valerie came to my house alone. She sat on the old armchair, hugging a cup of hot cocoa that I had just prepared. "Mom, lately, Richard comes home very late," she said with a trembling voice. "He says he's meeting with partners, but one time I called the office and the secretary told me he had left in the afternoon." I looked into her eyes and clearly saw the worry reflected in them. I wanted to hug her, tell her everything would be okay, but I just patted her on the shoulder and said in a calm tone, "Busy men with their work are like that. Honey, don't overthink it." Valerie nodded, but her smile was forced, as if she were trying to hide a wound. I blamed myself for not asking more. I, a mother with 6 decades of life, should have recognized the signs, but I was afraid that if I dug too deep, I would hurt my daughter. I chose to stay quiet, and now remembering it, I regret it so much. The following month, I decided to take a pot of mole sauce to Valerie's house. I wanted to surprise her. When I arrived, I saw Richard's car parked outside, but Valerie told me he's taking a shower. I nodded and sat on the sofa to wait. Suddenly, Richard's phone rang on the table. The screen lit up with the name Chloe. Valerie looked at the screen. Her hand trembled a little, and after hesitating for a few seconds, she answered. A sharp female voice sounded on the other end. "I left my bracelet on your bed. Don't let Valerie see it, okay?" I saw my daughter freeze her face, as pale as if all the blood had drained from it. She hung up quickly, stammering, "It must have been a wrong number, Mom." I was frozen, not knowing what to say. Inside me, a seed of doubt began to sprout, but I continued to remain silent. The next day, Richard appeared at my door with a bouquet of lilies and a box of pastries from the Villaseñor bakery. He smiled calmly with a kind voice. "Mom, that was Chloe, my sister-in-law, who called yesterday. She asked me to help her with some things." "She likes to joke like that, don't worry." I smiled back, pretending to believe him, but deep down, I knew he was hiding something. A week later, Valerie called me crying on the phone. "Mom, he hid the savings passbook from me. He says it's for an investment, but he won't let me know what." I felt my heart tighten. I remembered Richard's look, his fake smile, the smell of the strange perfume. I decided to go see him. That day he received me in his office with his elegant suit and his perfect smile. "I just want to surprise Valerie," he told me. "I'm buying a new apartment for us to live in separately." And a few days later, Valerie sent me photos of an apartment under renovation, and I calmed down. Now that I think about it, I realize I was too naive to believe his lies. In mid-June, Valerie told me that Richard had invited Chloe to dinner at their house. I decided to drop by unannounced, bringing some sweet breads. As I entered, I saw Chloe in a bright red dress in the kitchen, laughing and talking with Richard. He was pouring her wine, and his fingers brushed the rim of the glass, a small gesture, but one that made me shiver. Valerie was sitting on the sofa with a tense smile, pretending that everything was fine. I said I was tired and left early, but the unease didn't leave me alone on the way back. I wondered, why was Chloe there so comfortable? Why was Valerie trying to hide her sadness? A week later, Valerie wrote to me. "Mom, He says Chloe is about to separate from her brother, that they need to spend time together so he can comfort her. My daughter's words made me want to warn her immediately to shout that they were deceiving her. But I remained silent, afraid of meddling in her affairs. I was afraid of hurting her, afraid she would push me away. Oh, I wish I had spoken that day. At the end of June, Richard called me to borrow money, saying it was to urgently close an investment deal. I didn't believe him, and I told him I had to ask Valerie first. He changed his tone instantly, letting out a light laugh. "It doesn't matter, Mom, I'll manage." I knew he was hiding something, but I had no proof. I only had a mother's premonition, and that premonition was getting stronger. The morning of the accident at 8:20, my phone vibrated. A message from Valerie. "Mom, I was cleaning my room today and found a woman's jacket in the closet." I was so scared. I wanted to call her right away, but the heavy rain made the signal cut out. I stood there looking at the phone screen, feeling as if a huge stone was crushing my chest. Around 11, Mrs. Linda heard a heartbreaking scream and then a terrible thud at Valerie's house. 20 minutes later, Richard took my daughter to the hospital. I didn't know anything until the afternoon. Now sitting in the empty kitchen, I turned on the phone and read Valerie's last message one more time. The unfinished words seemed like a cry for help that never arrived. "Mom, I think he's hiding something from me. If something happens to me, please." I squeezed the phone tightly, tears streaming down my cheeks. All the signs were as clear as day. The times Richard looked at his cell phone, the strange perfume, Chloe's shrill voice, the jacket in the closet. I saw it all, but I chose to ignore it. I blamed myself, wondering how a mother could allow her daughter to fall into danger like that. The next morning, the rain in the city had stopped, but the air was still damp and heavy. I got up before dawn, prepared a thermos of hot coffee, and wrapped some sweet breads from the Villaseñor bakery to take to the hospital. I wanted to thank the nurses who had cared for Valerie so dedicatedly during the most critical hours. When I entered the lobby of St. Philip's Hospital at 6:30, the smell of disinfectant hit me again, reminding me of the horror of the previous night. But today, I was no longer the desperate mother running in the rain. I walked slowly with a tight but firm heart. I knew I had to stay calm to face whatever came. In the lobby, I saw Richard standing impeccable in his gray suit, holding a bouquet of white lilies. He was talking to Dr. Evans in a confident and serene tone like an exemplary husband. When he saw me, he hurried over his face, adopting a perfectly rehearsed expression of concern. "Mom, I'm going crazy with worry," he said with a trembling false voice. "I couldn't sleep all night." I looked into his eyes, searching for a bit of sincerity, but I only found emptiness. His words were soft, but his gaze was cold, as if he were acting out a play he already knew by heart. I asked in a calm but cold voice, "You left the hospital quite early last night. Where did you go?" He answered immediately without hesitation. "The police needed me to sign the report at the scene of the accident. Then I had to go home to get some things for Valerie." I lowered my gaze to his hand, short, clean nails without a single scratch, even though he said he held his wife when she fell. I pressed my lips together, holding back the rage that was boiling inside me. He handed the bouquet of lilies to a nurse, speaking in a soft voice. "Please place this by my wife's bed." That gesture gave me chills. He acted too well, as if he weren't the man who had pushed my daughter down the stairs. Just then, Mrs. Stella Richards' mother appeared. She entered elegantly, wearing a black silk dress and a brilliant pearl necklace. She hugged me and whispered with a voice full of intention, "Poor Richard, he's so upset, Elizabeth. Your daughter is so clumsy." Her words were like a stab sharp, but wrapped in honey. I held back, didn't respond, just tightly gripped the thermos of coffee in my hand. Clumsy, my Valerie. Intelligent, careful, a winner of a painting award in school. Clumsy. It wasn't the time yet. When I entered Valerie's room, she was still asleep, her face pale under the fluorescent light. Richard sat next to the bed, took her hand, and said in a tone loud enough for me to hear, "Love, wake up, I'm here." I stood a few feet away watching. In his eyes there was no pain or fear, only calculation. He acted as if I were the only spectator in that scene. I felt a knot in my chest, not from sadness, but from the fury that consumed me. Did he really think that because of my age I was weak and easy to fool? A young nurse came in to check her vital signs. Richard immediately asked, feigning concern, "Did the doctor say when my wife will be able to leave?" The nurse replied that they needed to observe her for a few more days. He sighed with a dejected air. What a disaster the work at the office is piling up. I noticed he kept mentioning work, but his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the name CM on the screen. He turned off the cell phone immediately, with a movement so fast it almost seemed frightened. I pretended not to have seen it, but inside I knew perfectly well who CM was. Mrs. Stella spoke sweetly. "Elizabeth, I'll stay to take care of my daughter-in-law. You should go rest, you look exhausted." I looked her straight in the eye and answered firmly, "No, I'm staying. My daughter needs me." She pressed her lips together, a spark of annoyance in her eyes. Then she leaned towards Richard and whispered something to him. He nodded as if they were sharing a secret I shouldn't know. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palm, but I kept a slight smile on my face. Around 9 in the morning, 2 plainclothes inspectors arrived at the hospital. Richard quickly went out into the hallway to greet them and spoke with them for about 10 minutes in a low but hurried voice. I watched him from a distance. He ran his hand through his hair over and over again, a typical gesture of his when he was nervous. When the inspectors left, one of them looked at me and said, "Ma'am, this was an accident." "There are no signs of a crime?" I asked in a cold voice. "Have you taken my daughter's statement yet?" They replied, "She's still weak. When she fully recovers, we'll be back." I nodded, although inside I knew they had already been convinced by Richard. He bowed his head to thank them, feigning relief, but I caught the half-smile that fleetingly appeared on his lips. When the police left, Richard turned to me and said in a soft voice, "Luckily, they understood the situation. I don't want the press to make a scandal." I replied coldly, "No one talked about the press. I just want to know the truth." He smiled slightly. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled it back as if it had been burned. "Mom, I also want Valerie to recover soon," he said. "I'm not hiding anything from her." His words made me want to scream. Nothing to hide. Then why is my daughter there with bruises on her neck, whispering that he pushed her down the stairs? I went out into the hallway and called Mrs. Linda, the neighbor I trusted the most. Her voice trembled on the other end of the phone. "I saw Chloe's car parked in front of your daughter's house that afternoon." "I thought she had just gone to visit her," I asked urgently. "And what happened after that?" she replied. "Around 1 I heard a scream, then a loud thud. A little while later I saw Richard's car speed away." Her words confirmed what Valerie had said. Chloe was there, Richard was there, and my daughter fell down the stairs not because she was clumsy. When I returned to the hallway, I saw Richard talking on the phone in a low but clear voice. "It's okay. Everything is under control. Don't come, Chloe." I stopped at the corner pretending to look out the window, but paying attention to every word. He continued, "She doesn't suspect anything. Just keep quiet for a few days, and everything will be fine." I took out my phone without making a sound and took a picture. Richard standing with a cold look holding the phone as if he were drawing up a perfect plan. When he turned around, I smiled as if nothing was wrong. He said, "I have to go home to change. I'll be back later," I replied. "Go. But remember, justice has a very good memory." "Richard." He smiled disdainfully and went out the door. I watched him as he walked away, feeling a storm begin to form inside me. He thought he could hide everything, but he underestimated a mother willing to do anything to protect her daughter. At noon, Mrs. Stella brought a pot of hot soup. She put it in front of me with a forced smile. "Mrs. Elizabeth, we should keep quiet for the honor of both families." Her words made me want to laugh. "Honor? Whose honor?" "When my daughter is there with bruises that can't be explained by an accident," I replied. "Honor is not built on silence and lies." She fell silent, looked away, and left without another word. At the end of the day, I sat next to Valerie's bed and took her hand. The bruises on her wrists were marked like traces of a betrayal. I asked the nurse on duty in a low but firm voice, "Could these marks be from someone holding her tightly?" She looked closely and nodded. "It's very possible, ma'am." "They don't look like injuries from a fall." Her words were like a ray of light confirming my suspicions. I thanked her and checked my phone. The photo of Richard saying, "Don't come, Chloe," was still there, bright inside my pocket. I saved it in a special folder with the name Beginning of the Truth. 3 days after Valerie was hospitalized, I still couldn't get the image of my weak daughter in bed out of my mind, the bruises on her wrists like silent accusations. I sat in the small kitchen looking out the window at the gray city sky. Richard, the son-in-law I once trusted, had disappeared with the excuse of an urgent meeting in Mexico City. He thought his absence would calm me down, but he was wrong. This time for me was the perfect opportunity to discover the truth, to uncover what he and Chloe were trying to hide. I decided to go to Valerie's house. The spare key was still in my old purse, cold and heavy, like the doubts I carried inside. When I opened the door, a blast of cold air hit me, as if the house, too, was trembling from the secrets it held. The strong smell of alcohol mixed with a cheap perfume that made me frown. On the dining table were several half-drunk wine glasses, one still with a red lipstick stain. I walked slowly, trying not to let my emotions overwhelm me. At the foot of the spiral staircase where Valerie had fallen, I saw several pieces of glass shining in the faint light coming through the window. Nearby, some dried bloodstains looked like my daughter's tears trapped on the wooden floor. I knelt down and with trembling hands touched the blood. "Valerie, forgive me," I whispered, holding back the tears that wanted to come out. I took out my cell phone and took pictures of every detail, the pieces of glass, the bloodstains, the glasses on the table. Each photo was a piece of the puzzle of truth that I was determined to reconstruct. I entered the room where the smell of perfume was even stronger. On the shelf next to the bed were 2 glasses of red wine, one with a clear lipstick mark. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine the horrible scene Valerie had witnessed. On the dresser, I saw a bottle of elegant vanilla perfume, the same scent Chloe used to wear, that sweet and fake smell that I had smelled so many times when I saw her. My heart was beating fast as I opened the drawer and found an old envelope. Inside was a hotel bill from the San Prado Hotel in the name of Richard Miller and Chloe Vargas, dated less than a month ago. I stood motionless, clutching the envelope as if it were the definitive proof to convict them. It wasn't just a suspicion they had betrayed her right in her own home. I carefully took a picture of the bill, put a towel stained with something red from the washing machine in a plastic bag, and picked up the perfume bottle. These small pieces of evidence were the voice of the truth that I would use to defend my daughter. As I was leaving the house, I ran into Mr. Alfred Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had been a policeman before retiring. He was watering the plants in his garden and recognized me immediately with his sharp gaze. "What are you looking for here, Elizabeth?" he asked in a deep but kind voice. I took a deep breath and decided to tell the truth. "I'm looking for answers about my daughter's accident." Mr. Thompson looked at me for a moment and nodded, motioning for me to come in. He poured a cup of hot coffee, whose intense aroma eased my tension a little. "That day around 12:40 it began. I saw Chloe's car parked in front of your daughter's house. The car door was ajar, but I didn't see anyone get out. About an hour later, I heard a loud scream and then a very heavy thud. 5 minutes later, I saw Richard run out with Valerie in his arms, put her in the car, and speed away." His words were like a stab confirming my worst fears. I immediately asked him, "Do you have security cameras at your house?" He nodded. "Of course, to watch over the neighborhood. I haven't erased the recordings. Do you want to see them?" We sat in front of his old computer, and the video from the camera appeared on the screen. Just as he had said, Chloe's silver SUV was parked in front of Valerie's house from 12:30 to 1:15. At 1:12, the front door opened, and a woman with brown hair hurried out, buttoning her coat, looking from side to side as if afraid of being seen. It was Chloe without a doubt. She walked quickly to the car, and her heels clicked hastily on the sidewalk. I clenched my fists, feeling the blood boil inside me. I asked Mr. Thompson to copy the video to a USB drive. He did it immediately without asking any questions. Before I left, he took my hand and said in a serious voice, "I was a policeman for 30 years, Elizabeth. I recognize the look of a guilty person. That Richard guy is not innocent." His words were like a ray of light in the darkness, giving me strength. I thanked him and left. The small USB drive in my jacket pocket felt like a sharp weapon. In the afternoon, it started to rain again. I drove along Old Stone Road until I stopped in front of St. Hope's Church. I entered, leaving wet footprints on the stone floor. In the dim light of the temple, I knelt before the image of the Virgin Mary and clasped my hands. I took out my phone and watched the video again. Chloe was leaving with her head down, and the door slammed shut behind her like a sentence. The rain beat against the stained glass windows, and the bells rang 6 times each chime like a beat of my determination. I didn't ask God to punish anyone. I only asked for the strength to keep going to protect my daughter. Father Michael Evans, an elderly priest, approached with a kind but worried look. "Elizabeth, is something troubling you?" he asked. I replied in a low but firm voice, "Father, I came to pray for someone who was betrayed." He put his hand on my shoulder and said in a warm tone, "God's justice always comes, although sometimes it's late." I looked up at the Virgin. The candlelight reflected in my eyes. Father Evans's words were a reminder. I was not alone on this path. As I was leaving the church, my phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Don't keep digging, ma'am. There are some things it's better not to know." I stood still in the rain, my shoulders getting soaked while the screen glowed in the darkness. I saved the number and wrote a note. "Richard or Chloe?" That message didn't scare me. On the contrary, it gave me more strength. Do they think that because I'm old, I'm weak, easy to intimidate? They forget that age not only brings wrinkles, but also patience and a sharp memory. I got in the car, turned on the windshield wipers, and drove slowly home. It was still raining, but I didn't feel cold anymore. A fire was burning inside me, not of hatred, but of love for Valerie. In the back seat, Mr. Thompson's USB drive flashed as a lightning bolt crossed the sky. I gripped the steering wheel and thought, this storm is not going to end in calm. The next morning, the sky over the city was still gray, and the humidity from the night's rain clung to the windows like tears that won't dry. I got up before dawn. Without turning on the light, I made black coffee with the old copper filter my husband left me. The bitter aroma filled the kitchen and took me back to the days when the family was complete. When Valerie was just a little girl running across the floor asking me to tell her stories. Now she was in the hospital, and I, an old mother, was facing all these dark secrets alone. On the kitchen table, Mr. Thompson's USB drive rested small but heavy like a whole accusation. I plugged it into the laptop and watched the video over and over again, at least 10 times, wanting to burn every detail into my mind. At the 12-second mark, Chloe left Valerie's house hurried, adjusting her jacket and carrying her heels as if she were fleeing. In the last few seconds, Richard's car started and disappeared in the rain. Every time I watched it, my heart tightened, not with sadness, but with a silent rage. I opened my old notebook and carefully wrote down the time, the place, the car's license plate. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle of truth that I was putting together. I printed the frames of the video with the old printer. The sound of the motor sounded as if it shared my determination. Around 8 in the morning, I arrived at St. Philip's Hospital. Richard still hadn't shown up, and that only made me more suspicious. Valerie was more awake now. Her eyes didn't have the same fog as yesterday. I sat by the bed. I gently stroked her hair, trying to hide what was boiling inside me. "Do you still remember what happened that day?" I asked, my voice soft but careful. Valerie nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "I heard Chloe's laugh, Mom. She said, 'Quick, before she comes back.' And then I saw them in my room." Her voice broke, as if that memory was still cutting her inside. I squeezed her hand, holding back my tears. "I understand," I whispered. "Rest. I'll take care of everything." I asked the nurse to move Valerie to a private room with the excuse that she needed quiet. In reality, I was afraid that Richard or Chloe would show up and continue their act in front of my daughter. When I went out into the hallway, a young nurse called me, her voice hesitant. "Mrs. Miller, there's a letter for you at the reception." I took the envelope, my heart racing. Inside there was only a small piece of paper with clumsy handwriting. "You're doing something stupid. Stop." I put the note in my pocket without saying anything, but inside a fire ignited. They were scared, and that only made me feel more determined. At noon I drove to St. Hope's Church, where I had taught catechism decades ago. The church was empty, just a few old people praying in low voices, whispers that mixed with the smell of candles and incense. I knelt before the image of the Virgin Mary. I lit a small candle. The light flickered like a promise. I didn't ask God to punish Richard or Chloe. I only asked for strength so that these old hands wouldn't tremble when the time came to act. "Dear Virgin," I whispered, "give me the courage to protect my daughter." Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted to feel that pain so it would remind me that I couldn't stop. Father Michael Evans, an elderly priest with white hair, approached me. "Elizabeth, I haven't seen you at Mass in a long time," he said in a warm, deep voice. "Is something tormenting you?" I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had seen so many stories of the parishioners. "Someone hurt my daughter," I replied, my voice low but firm. "But Justice seems to be asleep." Father Evans looked at me for a long time and then said slowly, "God's justice may be slow, but it always arrives. Don't let hatred blind you." I nodded and stood up, feeling his words give me strength. As I passed by the altar, I saw an open Bible. A phrase in italics caught my eye. "The truth will set you free." I took a picture of it with my cell phone, as if it were a prophecy. In the church courtyard, I met Mr. Thompson again. He was carrying a basket of sweetbreads to give to the priest with a kind smile on his wrinkled face. I told him about the threatening letter, unable to hide the worry in my voice. He frowned with the sharp gaze of an ex-policeman. "They are clearly watching you. Be careful when you move, Elizabeth." He gave me a small piece of paper with the number of Carl Reynolds, a private investigator in San Juan County. "Call him," he said. "Carl is trustworthy. He will help you." That afternoon, I went to the Old Parish Cafe, a small and cozy place with old stone walls. Carl Reynolds was already waiting for me with short hair, a neat figure, and a sharp gaze. He got straight to the point. "You just want me to confirm the locations and routines of those two people." I nodded. I gave him a USB drive, some printouts of the video, and the address of Richard's house. "They are people with money and connections," he said in a serious voice. "I need very clear evidence." I replied, "Do your job. I will pay all the expenses." Carl nodded and put the USB drive in his pocket. 3 days. I'll let you know." When I got home, I opened the old wooden wardrobe where I kept my husband's letters. Inside a small metal box, I hid the backup USB drive as if it were a protective amulet. Before going to sleep, I looked out the window. A strange car was parked 3 houses down from mine with its lights off, but I could make out the silhouette of someone sitting still inside. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't afraid. I turned off the light, drew the curtains, and gripped the phone tightly. That night it rained again, not hard but constant and cold, as if whispering that this path would not be easy. 2 days after receiving the message from Carl, the private investigator, I was sitting in my small kitchen, the dim light of the lamp illuminating the USB on the table. Carl's message was short but sharp as a knife. "Chloe goes to Richard's house every Tuesday and Friday afternoon. She stays for more than an hour. I have photos." I opened the files he had sent me, and my heart raced as I saw the photo of Chloe leaving Richard's house with a bottle of red wine in her hand, her hair tied back loosely, and a man's shirt hastily thrown on. Her face showed a slight hint of panic, as if she were afraid of being seen. I didn't reply to Carl. I just saved the photos in a separate folder with the name Evidence. Each photo was a piece of the puzzle, and I was putting the truth together little by little to protect my daughter. That afternoon, the phone vibrated. Richard called with his usual sweet and fake voice. "Mom, I went to the hospital to see Valerie today, but the nurse said she was tired. You should rest, I replied. My voice was calm, but cold. I'll go later. You take care of your things. He laughed, trying to soften his tone. I just want to help. Don't think I'm indifferent. I hung up, gripping the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Did he think I was going to believe those lies? Number, I wasn't going to sit around today. I drove straight to Richard's house in the Olives residence, an elegant neighborhood with rows of green trees. I stopped the car at the beginning of the street. I bought a bouquet of white lilies at a flower stand to blend in. In my coat pocket, the phone was already recording, ready to register everything. I walked to Richard's door. I took a deep breath and rang the bell. He opened the door with a poorly acted expression of surprise. Mom, I was just thinking of going to see you tomorrow. I smiled slightly and said calmly, I just came to get something for Valerie. He invited me in, but his eyes darted around the room as if looking for something to hide. The house was suspiciously clean. The smell of air freshener tried to cover up the smell of alcohol and perfume. I put the bouquet of lilies on the dining table and looked around. On the sofa, a long brown hair shone in the light. On the table, a half-drunk glass of wine with a dark red lipstick mark on the rim. I pretended not to notice and walked towards the bedroom, saying aloud, I'll just grab some clothes for Valerie. The room had a faint scent of elegant Vanilla Chloe's perfume, that sweet and fake smell I would never forget. On the bureau, Valerie's wedding photo was face down with a long scratch on the frame. I picked it up, dusted it off with my sleeve, and put it back in its place as a way of reminding him that Valerie was still the heart of that house. Richard was leaning against the door with his arms crossed, watching my every move. What are you looking for, Mom? He asked in a tense tone. I pointed to a black silk scarf that was on the chair. Whose scarf is this? He answered immediately without thinking. It's Mom's, she must have forgotten it. I smiled, my voice soft but cutting. I don't wear this type, but it's pretty. He fell silent, looking away. Do you want something to drink? Can I make you a coffee? He said, eager to change the subject. I sat in the chair, opened my purse, and checked my phone. The recorder was still running. I decided to start my own play. My daughter said that before she fell, she heard a woman's voice inside the house. I said, looking him straight in the eye, Do you know who came that day? Richard tensed, turned his head, and answered in a higher-than-normal tone. Nobody came. Valerie must have imagined it. She's been very stressed lately. I tilted my head and spoke slowly. So stressed that she would fall down the stairs on her own. He let out a nervous laugh, clenching his hands. Sometimes women lose their balance, maybe because of the sleeping pills. I looked at him directly, my voice as cold as ice. Are you completely sure that there was no one else in the house that day? He answered sharply. No, absolutely no one. But just then the back door moved slightly. I turned and saw Chloe standing there with a glass of wine in her hand, her hair down, wearing a white man's shirt with the buttons badly buttoned. The air in the room froze. Chloe smiled awkwardly. Good afternoon, Mrs. Elizabeth. I just came to comfort Richard. We're both very tired. I stood up, looked her up and down, my voice calm but sharp. Comforting him in this way. Richard hurried to get in between. Mom, don't misunderstand, we were just talking. I didn't answer. I took the bouquet of lilies that was on the table, took out the hidden phone from among the flowers, and activated the speaker. Carl's voice sounded clear on the recording. Chloe Vargas left Richard Miller's house at 6:45 after being inside for an hour and a half. They both froze. Chloe's face turned pale, and Richard took a step back, stammering. Mom, what are you doing? I pressed the next audio. Richard's voice from the call at the hospital echoed in the room. Don't come, Chloe. He stood rigid, his eyes filled with fear. Chloe's hand trembled. The glass fell to the floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces. The red wine spread like a pool of blood, reflecting the dim light from the ceiling. I spoke slowly, my voice firm and cutting. Justice doesn't need police, just a mother's memory. Richard took a step towards me with an aggressive tone. Are you threatening me, Mom? I looked him straight in the eye. No. I'm just recording what you said yourselves. I bent down, picked up a piece of broken glass, and left it on the table as a warning. The two of them remained silent, not daring to move. I turned around, walked to the door, and said without looking back, "If you have any conscience left, prepare to confess. I won't repeat it a second time." In the yard, a drizzle began to fall, and a lightning bolt lit up the roof, as if the sky also shared my anger. I got into the car, opened the newly saved recording, and named it The Whole Truth. When the car started, I looked in the rearview mirror. Chloe was still there, trembling, her arms wrapped around her shoulders. Richard was sitting, his head buried in his hands, as if his perfect play had just collapsed. I drove straight to the hospital, my heart lighter than before. I knew that this time I had struck a heavy blow. 2 days after the tense confrontation at Richard's house, I returned to St. Philip's Hospital with a new determination. Valerie was already better, although still weak. I sat by her bed, took her hand, and asked the doctor to let her leave the hospital soon to rest at home. "I want you to rest in your own home," I told my daughter, my voice soft but firm. Dr. Evans agreed on the condition that I make sure Valerie received all the necessary care. I nodded, promising myself that no place would be safer for my daughter than the house I had built with love. When we got home, the neighbors came to visit, bringing with them a human warmth that I had almost forgotten during so many gray days. Mrs. Linda brought a pot of steaming chicken soup with the aroma of cilantro and lemon filling the room and bringing a small smile to Valerie's face for the first time in days. Mr. Thompson, with his kind smile, left a basket of freshly baked sweetbread on the table. "Let her eat to regain her strength," he said with a look full of compassion. Valerie lay on the sofa hugging an old blanket and whispered, "I just want all this to be over, Mom." I looked into her eyes and saw that the pain was still there, but also a small glimmer of hope. "It will be over," I replied with a determined voice, "but it has to end the right way." That afternoon, I called Mrs. Stella Richards' mother. My voice sounded calm, as if I were just inviting her to a regular family dinner. "This Friday night, I want to invite your family to dinner at my house. We'll pray together for Valerie." She hesitated for a moment, her voice a little shaky. "But Richard is very busy." I interrupted her, maintaining a friendly tone. "It will just be a dinner. I also want to thank him for taking my daughter to the hospital in time." After a few seconds of silence, she accepted, also saying that she would bring Chloe, so there would be more of us. I smiled into the phone, but inside me, a plan had already taken shape. I sent a message to Mr. Thompson. "Tomorrow night, if you can bring the USB and help me." He replied immediately, "I'll be there." I spent the entire next morning preparing the dinner of destiny. I cooked mole sauce, Valerie's favorite dish since she was a child. I wrapped tamales in fragrant corn husks. I prepared a cactus salad with fresh tomato and onion and a pitcher of hot atoll. I cleaned the long wooden dining table. I placed a flawless white lace tablecloth. I lit small candles and put an image of the Virgin Mary in the center as a silent witness. Valerie was in her room, her legs still weak, her eyes tired but curious. I told her, "Tonight I just want to talk to them. Stay resting, don't come out." She nodded, but her eyes seemed to ask, "What are you going to do, Mom?" At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. Richard entered, elegant in his black suit, his smile polite, but unable to hide the tension in his eyes. Mrs. Stella walked beside him, still with that air of sophistication and her pearl necklace shining, but her face betrayed a clear uneasiness. Chloe was behind in a tight white dress, and the heavy smell of her elegant vanilla perfume spread throughout the room. I greeted them with a slight smile. "Thank you for coming. Let's pray together for Valerie." I led them to the dining room where the candlelight illuminated the statue of the Virgin, creating a warm but tense atmosphere. When everyone was seated around the table, I poured the wine and spoke in a low voice. "Before we eat, I want to show you a video that the neighbors sent me so we can watch it together and pray that the truth comes to light." Richard frowned, his voice a little harsh. "What video, Mom?" I didn't answer. I just turned on the television and connected Mr. Thompson's USB. The blurry image appeared on the screen. In front of Valerie's house, Chloe's silver SUV was parked. Then her silhouette was seen leaving in a hurry with her shoes in her hand and looking back as if afraid of being discovered. The click-clack sound of the video filled the silent room like hammer blows against that false silence. Mrs. Stella's face turned pale. She turned to Chloe, her voice trembling. "That's your car, isn't it?" Chloe tried to smile, but her smile twisted. I just stopped by to visit Valerie for a moment." I didn't let her continue. I switched to the second clip. Richard's voice on the hospital recording sounded icy. "Don't come, Chloe. She's already starting to suspect." Richard jumped to his feet, his face flushed. "Mom, did you record me?" I looked him straight in the eye and answered calmly. "You don't need to record. You said it yourself." "I just put it on so everyone could hear it." Chloe's hand trembled. The glass on the table fell and the wine spilled onto the white lace tablecloth like a bloodstain. Mrs. Stella exclaimed furiously, "My God, what the hell have you two done?" Richard tried to justify himself, his voice breaking. "It was a misunderstanding. Valerie was jealous. She fell on her own." I tilted my head, my voice sharp. "She fell on her own, and that's why she has fractures and a cracked head. She fell on her own, and that's why her wrists are full of bruises, as if someone had held her tightly." He opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. Just then, the bedroom door opened. Valerie appeared, leaning on a crutch, her face pale, but her gaze firm. The girl looked directly at Richard and Chloe and spoke in a low but clear voice. "Do you remember, Richard? When you pushed me, you said, 'You shouldn't have come back so soon.'" The air in the room became thick. Richard took a step back, his face as white as a sheet. Chloe lowered her head, her hands trembling. Mrs. Stella broke down crying, covering her face as if she couldn't bear the truth. I didn't cry. I just stood there watching them in silence, feeling my heart finally free from a huge weight. The front door burst open. Mr. Thompson entered with 2 police officers. One of them was Inspector Olson, the same one who had told me before that there were no signs of a crime. Mr. Thompson handed him the USB, saying in a grave voice, "Now there, our Inspector." The man quickly reviewed the video, his gaze cold. He motioned to his partner and turned to Richard. "Mr. Miller, please come with us. We need to clarify some things." Richard shouted, his voice filled with panic. "I didn't do anything wrong. Mom, tell them the truth." Mrs. Stella just slumped into her chair, unable to utter a word. The pearl necklace around her neck shone in the candlelight like a mockery. Chloe wanted to run after Richard, but the police stopped her, asking her to give her statement. I approached the table, took the spilled wine glass, and placed it back in front of them. I said in a soft voice, but clear enough for everyone to hear, "This dinner is not for forgiveness. It's for closure." When Richard was taken to the patrol car, the red and blue lights flashed on the silent walls of my house. The sound of sirens mixed with the fine rain, forming a sad melody. I stood at the door watching his shadow disappear into the darkness. The neighbors had gathered in front of the gate whispering, "Did they really arrest Mr. Miller?" Some were raising their phones trying to capture the moment. Mrs. Stella Richard's mother was trying to shoo away the reporters while she cried and begged, "Don't record, this is just a family matter." But her voice trembled, as if she herself didn't believe what she was saying. Chloe slumped into a chair, her face pale without a trace of makeup. She held her head in her hands as if she wanted to escape reality. Inspector Olson approached me with a serious look. "Do you have more evidence?" I silently handed him the copy of the bill from the San Prado Hotel and the photos that Carl Reynolds had taken. Images of Chloe leaving Richard's house wearing his shirt with a bottle of wine in her hand. He reviewed them one by one and nodded. "This is enough. They'll have to answer for everything in the interrogation." I didn't answer. I just watched him leave, taking Richard and Chloe with him. The house fell silent. The only sound was the crackling of the candles burning on the table. The dining table was a mess. The spilled wine, the white tablecloth stained red, the burnt-down candles. Mr. Thompson stood beside me and sighed. "You did what the police should have done a long time ago," I replied calmly. "I just did what a mother has to do." Valerie came closer, leaning on her crutches, and hugged me tightly. Her body was still trembling, but her hug was warm, as if she wanted to tell me that she finally felt safe. I stroked her back gently. "Now you can sleep peacefully." Mrs. Stella approached, her eyes red and her voice hoarse. "Mrs. Elizabeth, please don't destroy my family's honor any further." I looked her straight in the eye and replied coldly, "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just letting the truth speak for itself." She lowered her head without saying another word and left with her chauffeur. Her figure was lost in the rain, like a shadow fading into the night. That night, Valerie and I cleaned the table together. She was picking up the pieces of broken glass, her hands still bandaged. I told her, "Don't touch them. Let me do it." But Valerie shook her head and murmured, her voice soft but firm, "It's okay, Mom. I want to touch the remains of the lie with my own hands." I looked at her, and I felt a mixture of pride and pain. My Valerie, though wounded, was stronger than I imagined. Outside, the rain was falling again, and the thunder rumbled in the distance as a reminder that the storm had passed, but its traces were still there. I turned off all the lights, leaving only one candle lit on the table. The flickering light reflected on the wall, where our two shadows blended into one. I sat next to Valerie, took her hand, and felt the warmth of her thin fingers. "Forgive me," I whispered, "for not having protected you sooner." Valerie shook her head with tears running down her cheeks. "Mom, you did everything for me. I know." The next morning, the city's daily newspaper published on the front page, "Bank director arrested on suspicion of assaulting his wife. The mistress is his sister-in-law." The headline was in bold, accompanied by a photo of Richard being taken to the police car. I folded the newspaper, put it on the table, and said nothing. I didn't need to read anymore. The truth had already come out, and that was all I wanted. At noon, Carl Reynolds called. The police confirmed that the recordings and videos are valid. Richard is still denying it, but Chloe has already started to cooperate. I replied in a calm voice, "I don't care what they say. I just want them to never have the chance to hurt my daughter again." Carl let out a small laugh on the phone. "You are a fearsome mother, Mrs. Miller." I didn't laugh. I just hung up and looked out the window where the sun was beginning to peek through the clouds. That afternoon, Valerie and I went to St. Hope's Church to give thanks. The church was still empty, with a faint scent of incense. Father Michael Evans looked at us tenderly. "Has justice arrived, my daughters?" I replied. "Yes, Father, but it didn't come from the court." We lit candles in front of the image of the Virgin Mary. Valerie knelt to pray, and I stood behind, watching how the flickering light of the candles illuminated her face. For the first time in many days, I saw her at peace. As we left the church, some people looked at me. A woman murmured, "That's the mother who made the traitors pay for what they did." I didn't answer. I just squeezed Valerie's hand and we kept walking. When I got home, I saw a small envelope on the table with no return address. Inside was a piece of paper written in a hurry. "I'm sorry, you were right. No one can harm your daughter and sleep in peace. Signed, C." I burned the paper in the kitchen and watched the ashes scatter in the candlelight. I didn't need Chloe's apology. She and Richard had dug their own grave. That night, Valerie ate more than usual. Her smile was brighter, although still weak. I went out into the garden and planted a white rose bush in the late afternoon light as a promise that from now on, everything would be new, Mr. Thompson stopped by to visit with a bottle of wine. "Let's toast to justice." I poured 2 glasses and raised mine, not for victory, but for truth. We toasted, and the sound of the glass resonated in the silent house. At midnight, I sat down to write in my diary. Day 17 after the accident. My daughter is safe. Justice has arrived, although late. Outside, the crickets were chirping, and the sky was clear, full of stars. I closed the notebook and blew out the last candle. Before going to sleep, I looked at the sky and whispered, "No one touches my daughter and sleeps peacefully. And if anyone dares, I am still here." A week after Richard's arrest, I was in the small kitchen preparing a basket with fresh mango juice and warm, sweet rolls from the Villaseñor bakery. Valerie had been transferred to the rehabilitation area of St. Philip's Hospital, and every morning I went early, bringing a little taste of quiet days to comfort her. As I entered the room, I saw Valerie sitting on the bed, her gaze more alive and her cheeks already pink. I brushed her long black hair, tied it with a silk ribbon, and placed a vase of white lilies next to the bed, the flowers she had loved since she was a child, when she would run after me in the garden, asking me to let her put one in her hair. Dr. Evans entered with a kind smile on his face. "She is recovering very quickly, all thanks to such a strong mother." I replied in a soft voice, "Justice is also a good medicine, doctor." He nodded, as if he understood that what I had done was not only out of love, but also out of a promise to myself. At noon, Mr. Thompson stopped by to visit me with a copy of the city's daily newspaper. He handed it to me and pointed to the headline on the front page. "Unfaithful couple under investigation. The victim is recovering miraculously." Below the headline was a photo of Valerie taken from a distance. Her face was blurry, but that faint smile still warmed my heart. Mr. Thompson said, "Chloe confessed." She said Richard threatened her, that he forced her to hide everything. I nodded, glancing at the newspaper without fully reading it. Valerie took it, read it in silence, and murmured, "Mom, I just want to forget everything." I took her hand, felt her thin but warm fingers. "Forgetting doesn't mean forgiving, but you have to keep living, Valerie." The head nurse came in to let us know that Valerie could leave the hospital tomorrow if her condition remained stable. I thanked her and went out into the hallway to call Mrs. Linda. Before dialing the phone, vibrated an unknown number. I answered, and Chloe Vargas's voice sounded between sobs. "Could you forgive me? I didn't want to kill Valerie. I was just afraid that Richard would destroy my life." I remained silent, let her speak, and then replied in a cold but calm voice. "I am not a judge, but maybe God will hear your words before I do," Chloe cried. "I've already left the city. I'll never come back." I hung up and looked out the hospital window. The pigeons were perched on the still, damp roof, and the blue sky looked as if it had never rained. I remembered the day I found out that Valerie had fallen down the stairs. The strong smell of alcohol, the constant sound of the heart monitor, the rain beating down relentlessly. Now everything was strangely quiet, as if the whole world were sighing with me. In the afternoon, Valerie took her first steps with the help of the nurse. I held her step by step with a mixture of joy and sadness. The nurse smiled. "It's like teaching a child to walk again," I replied. "Sometimes adults also have to learn to stand on their own 2 feet." When the sun set, the orange light of the sunset covered the entire room, dyeing the petals of the white lilies gold. From a distance, the bells of St. Hope's Church resonated, each chime like a reminder of days past. Valerie looked out the window and asked in a low voice, "How long will he be in prison, Mom?" I replied firmly, "Long enough for him to remember what he did every night when he hears those bells." She nodded without saying anything, but I saw her shoulders relax, as if a weight had been lifted from them. At night, Carl Reynolds called. "The case is closed. Richard was charged with intentional injury, and Chloe received clemency for cooperating with the investigation." I thanked him in a serene voice. "Thank you, Carl. Thanks to you, the truth came to light." I hung up. I opened the hospital closet and took out the black silk scarf, the last piece of evidence I had kept from Richard's house. I went out into the hallway and threw it in the hospital trash. Valerie looked at me and asked, "You threw it away, Mom?" I replied, "Yes, because it's no longer evidence. Now it's just a stain." Before going to sleep, Valerie took my hand. Her voice was soft but clear. "I feel relieved now, Mom. I used to be afraid I would never be able to escape that horrible image." I sat beside her and tucked her in. "You're going to get through this because Mom is always here." I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the bed listening to the sound of the rain hitting the window, the faint smell of disinfectant, and Valerie's peaceful breathing. At the head of the bed, the dim light of the lamp projected our shadow on the wall, blending into one like a promise that we would always be together. I whispered softly, almost to myself, "God doesn't punish quickly, but a mother doesn't wait that long." The light was still on next to the bed, soft but firm, like the love I feel for Valerie, which never goes out. 3 months after Richard was arrested, the rainy season in the city had ended, leaving a clear sky with the bougainvillea blooming on the roofs. I moved in with Valerie to her small house. Valerie, now fully recovered, reopened her art workshop for disabled children. Every morning I saw her in front of the easel, guiding the little ones as they painted colorful pictures. Her smile was brighter than ever. I spent my days planting vegetables in the garden, feeding the pigeons, and listening to the news on the old radio. One morning, while watering the white roses in the front, the radio gave a brief news report. Former bank director Richard Miller has been sentenced to 12 years in prison for intentional injury. I turned off the radio and sat in silence on the wooden chair, listening only to the wind passing through the bars. I felt a deep peace, not of victory, but because finally justice had arrived for my daughter. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of the earth, and felt a part of my heart begin to heal. In the afternoon, Mr. Thompson came to visit with a bottle of aged tequila. "Elizabeth Justice has been served," he said, leaving the bottle on the table. "But don't forget to take care of yourself." I smiled and poured 2 small glasses. After so many years, this is the first time I drink with a peaceful heart. We sat on the porch eating crispy fritters, watching the sky turn from blue to the orange of sunset. Valerie brought a plate of freshly made tamales and joked, "I think Mom should open a restaurant. Everyone would say the owner cooks with justice." The 3 of us laughed, and our laughter mixed with the fresh air like a melody that healed old wounds. The next day, I went to the Juarez market, where the stalls were full of colors and people. The usual florist, Mrs. Rose, called me from a distance. "Mrs. Elizabeth, has your daughter left the hospital yet? The whole neighborhood says you are the bravest mother in the city." I smiled, chose a bouquet of white roses, and replied, "I just did what a mother has to do." When I got home, I planted the roses right in front of the gate under the wooden sign that said Miller House. Every morning, I go out to water them and watch the dewdrops slide down the petals like small pearls shining in the sun. One afternoon, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photo of Chloe working in a small tailor shop in Puebla. Her face looked tired, but at peace. Her skilled hands held a needle and thread. Behind the photo was a handwritten note. "I am trying to redeem my mistakes. Thank you for not completely destroying my life." I folded the photo, put it in the drawer, and didn't tell anyone. I didn't need Chloe's apology, but I was glad to know that she had chosen a new path, even if it was late. At night, Valerie called me to the patio. "Mom, look." In the sky, fireworks were exploding over the main square celebrating the 4th of July. The sound of mariachi music echoed, and the song "This Land Is Your Land" filtered in from the neighboring house. I stood next to my daughter watching the flashes that lit up the night, feeling that all the pain had finally come full circle. As I entered, I saw Valerie rocking her little granddaughter to sleep. The little girl was Valerie's older sister's daughter, and she had been sent to spend a few days with us. I looked at the little girl and smiled. She is going to grow up in a world where lies no longer exist. That night, I opened my old diary and wrote the last line. Day 120 after the accident. The rain has stopped. Justice has done its job. Valerie sleeps in peace. I closed the notebook. I turned off the light and went out onto the porch. The old cat was sleeping curled up on the railing, and the scent of roses floated in the night breeze. In the distance, the bells of St. Hope's Church rang 9 times each one, like a prayer for tranquility. I caressed the wooden rosary my husband left me and whispered, "No one touches my daughter," and sleeps peacefully afterward. A gentle breeze passed over the roof, bringing with it the smell of damp earth after the rain. I closed the door, leaving a single candle lit inside the house. My shadow stretched across the wall, silent but firm, like the spirit of all the mothers who ever stood up for their children. The story you have just heard has changed names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to regain your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that illuminates the path of another. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. For now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I think you will be surprised. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.